Welcome to tutorial number 2, specifically for programming, and we're still within the introductory phase of the Atmega 328P and working with that controller on a very basic level. So here we now have another visual example, and we're going to go through the same process as what we did in tutorial 1. So here you can see what happens when we press the buttons and when we don't press the buttons. Now you'll notice though that there's actually 4 different combinations or results. You'll notice that when both buttons aren't pressed, there's something that happens. Then when only one button is pressed, there's an action or a result. Then when another button is pressed, there is a different result. And then when both buttons are pressed, there's a different result. So now there's like 4 different possibilities that might occur on depending on how, or the combination in which the buttons are pressed. So now it's not just as simple as reading one button and having an outcome, but now we're gonna have to read 2 buttons and have outcomes. So let's just look at what do we notice. Now initially the green LED is on, the red LED is on, and the blue LED is off. This happens for 1 second, then the LEDs go off, and then we go into this testing sequence basically, which then repeats itself. So I've got button 0 and button 1, so for clarity's sake, this is button 0 because it's on pin 0 of port C. This is button 1 because it's on pin 1 of port C. So then here you can see this is what we've noticed, that if both buttons are not pressed, then the green LED is on and the red LED is off. Now notice that nothing happens with the blue LED throughout any of the sort of interactions. So green is on, red is off. If I press button 0 but I leave button 1 unpressed, the red LED is on and the green LED is off. Then should I press the combination where button 1 is pressed and button 0 is not pressed, then the red LED flashes while the green LED is on. And then if both buttons are pressed, both LEDs are on. And this process basically we find is what repeats itself. So what does that look like if we now translate, or how do we translate that into code? Because that is important. So let's just take it from the top here. So what I've done is, you can see I've just defined some of my instructions. So this is testing, specifically testing button 1, specifically testing button 2. Although you'll see I didn't end up using these explicitly in my code, but I'm just showing you that that was originally there. And the rest are basically unchanged. So here you can see this is what we started off as. What I did do is additionally here is I declared an additional variable called 3. And so this is just a variable. It's a char type variable. And what 3, the purpose of 3 is explained here at this point. So you can see here I switch the green and the red LED on, wait a second, turn them off, and then I enter into my continuous loop where I test the switches. So how do we go about testing these 2 separate switches? Well, the easiest actually, instead of trying to test 2 separate switches, you read the whole of port 3. So basically what we are doing here is, if we want to just draw the flow chart here, we are going to read port C. And so we know that that is done with the instruction pin C. So that reads port C. And then we mask port C. So we mask the bit, we mask bit 0 and bit 1, because those are where my buttons are connected. So I just mask that. And that you can see is what we do here. I read the port and I basically mask it, because remember this is going to be a binary value that looks like this, which means only whatever is on the least two significant bits, or the least two bits, the lower order bits of port C, will be allowed through. Everything else will sort of be killed by a 0. And so this is where these two bits, this is where you will find button 0 and button 1. So I read the port and I mask it, and then I have a testing procedure. I basically have an if statement. So here there's an if, and then there's three basic possible outcomes. So firstly, if it's 0 0, so this is button 1 button 0, or it could be if it is 0 1, or it is if it is 1 0, or we will have 1 1. And so if it's 0 0, we said that green is on and red is off. If it's 0 1, then I have green off and I have red on. If it's 1 0, then I have red that basically flickers, and the green LED can be on. And then if it's 1 1, then both LEDs will be on. So that's my basically the flow chart, and then from this point we basically go back there. So this is what will run on repeat. And this is how we did it. So firstly I get into the variable 3. What I do is I read port C and I mask it, and that result goes into 3, and then I just ask the question with an if statement. I test, I say if 3 is equal to 0, then we perform the necessary action. If 3 is equal to 1, then I perform the necessary action, the corresponding action or the desired action. If it's 2 and if it's 3. So you can see here basically just this, what we have here inside the if statements, correspond to what we wrote down here, and that corresponds to what we have seen previously. So it's not that there's anything new here, but there is a new concept or a new exercise, and that is that instead of testing single switches, you read a port with multiple switches on, and then the combination of those switches might be of such a sort that each combination should have a different desired outcome. And that is what we practiced here. In the first one we practiced just testing a switch and having a result. Here it was a bit more complex than that. So brief tutorial, but please practice this, and then when you get stuck, get onto the support, get onto the WhatsApp group, ask your questions, get clarification, and then you make sure that this becomes very comfortable to you. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you in the next session.